Good evening, everybody. Assalamu alaikum, and I hope we are live right now. I am here with the authors of Pakistan, A Fashionable History. My name is Fifi Haroon, and I'm a journalist. I work for the BBC. The book is called Pakistan, A Fashionable History, and it's published by Zuka Books. And the authors are Meher Fatma Hussain and Saad Sarfaraz Sheikh. I love the middle names as well, so I have to take a brief introduction. A brief introduction to the authors. Meher Hussain is a British Pakistani journalist and entrepreneur based in Lahore. She has worked in the media in various positions, including features editor at the Friday Times, and has been a syndicated columnist for the Daily Mail and Mail Today. She has worked on other non-fiction books and has been published as a short story writer. I haven't read that, Meher, but I hope that you will give me a link and I can read the short story as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Currently, she runs a social enterprise. Saad Sarfaraz Sheikh, I'm going to actually take the last thing that he mentioned on his bio as the first thing, because it was very, very interesting and intriguing. He is a member of Pakistan's only percussion band, Quadrum. Am I pronouncing that right, Saad?
Yes, that's
Quadrum.
right. Yes, Quadrum.
Okay. And they have performed at more than 500 concerts in Pakistan and abroad. And I can't believe that I haven't attended a single one of them, considering there have been 500.
Yeah, now that you've moved back, so we will invite you to one of our.
Now that I've moved back, you're going to have to do another one, and I will be there in the front row doing my thing. But there's more to Saad than being a percussionist. He is also a photojournalist and writer based in Lahore. And he's former desk editor for the Daily Times and the Friday Times. So maybe that's where the two of you met. Because both
no, actually,
not really.
Different times, not really. We met when Facebook was hip and happening, back in the day.
I also wrote for the Friday Times. So I think, that's one thing that we all have in common. His work has been featured in Time, Al Jazeera, Time Magazine, Al Jazeera, Esquire, Foreign Policy, Pulitzer Center on Crisis, Roads and Kingdoms, The Hindu, Vogue India, and Herald, Dawn, and God knows where else. He's been everywhere. He has taught photojournalism and conducted photography workshops. And here we go. So welcome to the Lahore Literary Festival's online sessions, Meher and Saad. And I just want to thank LLF for continuing during this very difficult time to just provide people with literary information, with such exciting and absorbing discussions, while many of us stay at home, or at least stay primarily at home. So Meher, I'll just start with you and ask you, why did you think it was time that a book on Pakistani fashion should be written?
Thank you, Fifi. I'd like to thank LLF for giving our book this platform. I'm particularly grateful to Razi for being such a source of support. And thank you, Fifi, for agreeing to moderate this session. There was no time for a fashion book, Fifi. The idea originated in the most mundane of ways when I was dropping off my toddler to his school, and I had a baby whom I had to leave at home. And it was just one of those mornings when everything goes wrong. Everything goes wrong. And so hurtling down Main Boulevard, panicking that I'd left.
So when everything goes wrong,
when everything goes wrong.
Okay, all right. That's a good response, I'd say.
No.
Go on.
I was hurtling down Main Boulevard, and the car in front, when we got to the school, the car in front was another parent dropping their child off, and the mum stepped out dressed to the hilt, hair blow dried, 4-inch heels, 3-piece lawn jora, and she looked as miserable as I felt. And the way she was teetering away and looking so uncomfortable, it just triggered something inside of me. I think coming from a long line of feminists, the feminists in me also sort of woke up and said, why is she doing this? Who is making her do this? Who's expecting women to dress this way? Why should a woman have to dress this way? And given that Saad and I both are investigative journalists, it just it all culminated inside of me. And I said, I've got to find out what this industry is about. Why is this industry expecting us to dress this way? And when I got home, there was a message from Saad, who was a colleague of mine, doing fantastic work with another colleague, Sonia Rahman. And that just culminated in us doing this story, this book.
So it's very interesting. Both of you have said to me previously, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that you actually didn't know that much about Pakistani fashion previously, previous to writing this book. And that to me is kind of, it's intriguing, because how or why does one choose to write a book about a subject that one doesn't know about? I mean, ordinarily, I would say I'm an expert in this field, so I want to write a book in this field. So why did you opt to write a book on something you yourself are saying you didn't know that much about? Or in fact, you said, why is this woman doing this? Yeah.
Absolutely. It was an investigation. It started out as something that we thought we would just do as a research piece. So we started investigating who or what kickstarted the fashion industry into being what it is today. And from then on, we started working backwards. Once we had a chronology that, hang on a second, when did you become aware of this? Or when did I become aware of this? And from there on, then we started going down a more professional route. Like, right, let's figure out who set up the first brand, who was the first couture designer, who decided this cut would apply at this particular time. And the more we researched, and we did a lot of research, and the more we investigated, I think by the time we had all our research piled up together, it just began forming into more than just a research paper and culminated into a book.
Well, okay, so two questions arise in my mind from this. And, Saad, please feel free to jump in at any point. I'm addressing the question to both of you. One is that, how difficult is it to publish a book in Pakistan? I mean, there aren't that many. There's a small publishing houses. There's not many places you can go. You can go for sponsorship. But how difficult is it for people out there who might want to write a book and feel inspired and write a book? Saad, how about you start with that?
Okay, sure.
Saad, go.
So yeah, I would personally say that it's very difficult, to get published. When it comes to a book, for example, this book, this started. We had interest from an Indian publisher when we started. We had, someone who, discussed the idea that, maybe it would be a good idea to publish this in India, because that's where all the Pakistani authors were going. And we also realized that this is a coffee table book. So, when you say it's a coffee table book, that means a good chunk of visuals inside, good printing quality, good paper quality. So obviously, from the very first day, we realized this is something we could not do ourselves, let's be honest. I mean, it's very rare that, authors, they do the entire thing themselves. There are publishing houses for that. But sadly, the way publishing is in Pakistan, we realized, that it's not very encouraging. Even if we were to have someone publish it, if you talk about royalties, it would be very difficult for us to...
The Indian deal didn't work out?
Oh, no, the Indian deal did not work out.
Because of Pulwama.
So the Pulwama thing happened last year.
Right.
Then it followed a ban on Indian products, especially including books. Indian books could not be marketed and distributed in Pakistan. So our Indian publisher assured us that things would get better, but we know how things are in Pakistan. And Meher actually tried a lot. She went to different ministries and tried to convince them, that books should at least be allowed. But, the last thing you want is to be painted like a traitor in Pakistan. So we realized, okay, now let's look for some local options. And sadly, the local options weren't that encouraging enough. And this actually led to Meher forming Zuka Books, where we decided to, in short, publish this, self-publish this book ourselves. And it allowed more creative control. Yes, we had to put in our own funds to do this, but we had everything from the paper to the size to the cover to everything that went inside. Because I'll be honest, I won't take names, but there were some publishers who were not comfortable with certain shoots. And I told Meher, look, Meher, someone did this shoot. It's a very bold shoot, and then for the 90s, even for maybe 2020. I don't want a publisher to tell me, "Ki ye aap nikal dein, you know, this isn't good enough," because I understand the publisher has to protect their publishing house or whatever. So I knew this would happen, especially with, you know, Pakistani publishers, and which is I always wanted some sort of an international publisher for this. But with Zuka Books, with Meher, you know, setting up her own publishing house, we realized that, you know, this is at the end of the day, we'll be responsible for whatever each and every word and, you know, photograph inside the book,
So
and that's
you'll
how
be
it is.
responsible for all the best things and the worst things in the
And the
book.
worst things, exactly.
Absolutely.
That's
We
how it
don't
is.
deny, we take responsibility in full. And I'd just like to add to the publishing industry, it's a real shame that our publishing industry does not do justice by its writers. When I started looking into publishing locally, what I discovered broke my heart. It's rotting within. Writers don't get their royalties, there's exploitation, there's stealing of money, there's piracy, there's copyright issues. And Fifi, we did try 2 times to go to local publishers, but looking at the level of lack of professionalism, the problem with ethics, it was so disappointing. And I thought, right, I'm going to try and set a new standard. If I have to do it with my own book, then so be it. Sometimes you have to take the first step. You would know this.
Meher, I would like you to add a bit about the bookstores as well, you know, the kind of percentages they offer.
Absolutely. It's very, very difficult for any writer or any publishing house to sustain itself, which is probably why we don't have many writers getting published locally or any new publishing houses coming up or any editing services being available. It's simply not sustainable. The market, the business model has got to change.
So the irony really is that if they want to be published, 9 times out of 10, or at least 8 times out of 10, Pakistani authors have to go to India to be published.
Absolutely.
And so when political relations sour between the two countries, or when there are issues, that means that authors have to again take a back seat and try for local options, which is difficult. And I'm sure, you know, it's complicated, and that it is complicated for both sides, you know, in the sense that the publishing industry probably has its own set of issues that they have to deal with in order to exist.
They do. So, I mean, our publisher was reluctant, you know, to return our publishing rights to us because they wanted to publish our book. And several other friends who've already landed deals in India, but have had great difficulty in bringing their books over to Pakistan, they face the same situation because 50% of India's publishing houses, they generate their sales within Pakistan. So it's a lucrative market. Yeah. But unfortunately, the local market, the publishing industry as a whole, does not do justice by its writers at all.
You were mentioning that little incident about the mother at who was at the school dropping her child off, and how she was perfectly dressed and, you know, perfectly sort of her hair was done and blow dried and everything. And you said you were wondering who tells us to dress this way, or who. So designers and fashion writers and critics and so on, and especially designers, are amongst those who tell us how to dress, or who certainly influence us in a lot of ways. How much influence do you think Pakistani designers have on Pakistani society and the way we dress and the way we look?
It's interesting. Pakistan's design history it's come full circle. Where about initially when it first started, now this would be around the 80s, it was the designers, the couture houses that first got established. They would define what people would wear. In Pakistan specifically, Pret came about long before couture did. So you had TJs who was designing clothes for streetwear. You had boutique culture, and then couture came about. In the West, you see clothes, fashion, style from the ramp trickle down onto the high street. Currently in Pakistan, the designers, the couture houses do not have that much of an influence anymore. In fact, street style is defined by external events, by socio-political reasons that have got nothing to do with design or fashion whatsoever. And couture
can you just
doesn't
explain
really
that
exist
a bit
anymore
more?
as it used to.
Sorry, can you just sort of elaborate on that? How do you, what do you mean by
part?
social events? What kind of social events do you mean?
What I mean is more by pop culture, what people see on television, what people see when they come back from their trips abroad. They would rather have those styles, those cuts, instead of a Pakistani designer offering something of their own. So for example, in the 80s and 90s, you had TJs, you had Generation for streetwear, and then you had the couture houses, Rizwan Beg, Seher Segal, Iman Emir, Faiza Sami, Mahin Khan, who were designing couture. And of course, Banto Kazmi had bridal. This was the system that was going up to 2000. Post 9/11, Pakistani style, Pakistani fashion had this massive identity crisis where they felt that their dressing had to be more Islamic. Now, Islamic in our country is synonymous with Arab. So you saw a lot of these kaftans, abayas coming into everyday wear, which was not exactly homegrown. No Pakistani designer was offering abayas or headgear as part of the daily wear. And that has continued. You see it even today with the element of the Turkish drama, Artugrul, where women want to dress like these Turkish ladies. So unfortunately, I feel that Pakistani designers and the fashion industry as a whole doesn't have that much of an influence anymore as it used to, whether it's pret, whether it's couture.
Okay, I mean, I would probably differ a little bit with you on that. Because I feel that in the UK, for example, or within the diaspora, I think 9/11 was a very defining kind of milestone. And I do believe that there has in Pakistan, there's been an increase in the demand for, let's say, conservative wear or
Yes.
You know, whatever sort of meets sort of certain religious expectations. But I think that designers have actually diversified in that couture designers have now become lawn designers and who are now marketing, let's say, textiles and have become, Sana Safinas, for instance, have become...
But Sana Safinas were doing that beforehand. This is all pre-2000. Sana Safinas
yes, but Sana Safinas, I would say have become very much a retail outlet, a retail
yes, absolutely.
house.
Again,
yeah, as opposed
this
to
is
a couture house.
Pre 9/11.
Yeah,
absolutely. And conservative dressing has been defined more by what's been happening globally. I mean, in the 90s, I remember wearing sleeveless shalwar kameez as if it was completely a norm. It was very odd
oh
to
my
see
God,
someone.
You wore sleeveless shalwar kameez.
Ethan for life. But seeing someone wear sleeveless now in Lahore is like, whoa, that's risque. That's really risque. When it's just, it was never, conservative dressing came about as a reaction. It was never homegrown.
Okay. So the fashion industry in Pakistan, whether it's couture or especially couture, but also in retail, it features many tribes and loyalties. Did this interfere with sourcing material for your book?
Saad, would you like to
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
take that one?
Sure. So I said the Pakistani fashion industry features many tribes and loyalties. And did this interfere with sourcing material for your book?
Yeah, I think it did because you see, when you're talking about an industry, there are people who have been working for a long time, and naturally, when Meher and I would approach certain people who we wanted to be a part of the book, their first question was, "Who else is in the book?" So we would obviously try to impress them with big names as big as theirs maybe, and there were certain people who were not comfortable with other people, and so I met a lot of people, for example, a lot of these old, photographers, and they were not willing to share their archives because, they were like, I'm also working on a similar book. And I said, give me the B grade stuff, give me the C grade stuff, because I wasn't around when you were doing this, this work. So yes, it did interfere. But then that's why we had to rely on a lot of newspaper archives, a lot of old magazine archives, because those I found lying around, old bookstores in Karachi, for example, and a lot of random places. When we realized, that it is going to be a little difficult, and that was something which at least I didn't expect this. I thought most of the designers would have their archives, and some of the photographers even didn't have their archives. They in fact asked me that, if you find some of my work, please share it with me as well. So, which we've had, the other day we were having this discussion, and it also led to this idea that, I think in Pakistan there is no concept of actually preserving, for example, research material, for that matter, especially in terms of visuals, for example. We don't have that concept. I would love to have access to some sort of a public library within Pakistan where I could actually go, and actually access these archives if they exist. But we couldn't find any of
Yeah.
those. And so most of the archives that we have, except for the vintage ads, most of the older shoots we have are actually from old magazines that I found, that Meher and I collectively found lying here and there. And so they're very exclusive to the book also. And there's a lot of stuff that hasn't, that even the designers themselves didn't have. And now, actually, now that people are seeing the book, so we're getting requests from photographers that, can you please share this photo that I took, like 20 years ago. So that's a good feeling, so they're also rebuilding their archives in a way.
I would refer, regards to your question, no, there weren't any cliques or divisions that hampered the compilation of the book. In fact, it didn't matter whether someone was in a particular city or not, or in another one. Everyone was very open to the idea, which was, documenting the industry as a whole. I don't think the clique thing really had an impact for us. Yes, we approached everyone, and by everyone, I mean all those original, because this is obviously looking at the roots of the industry. So we had to dig out people, we had to find them globally, we had to track them down all over. I mean, I remember tracking you down as well in London. And everyone was open to the idea.
Full disclosure that there is a chapter on me in the book, so I'm sort of a part of this. So yes, please go on.
Yeah. So I think, and what's interesting is this is the first time, I suppose calling a book a platform would be stretching it a bit, but for the sake of my answer, I'm going to refer to the book as a platform. It's the first time that all of Pakistan's designers, the original lot, have come together on in one single platform. Otherwise, normally you don't see it. There's always a division or some sort of difference.
Sorry, Meher, for cutting in. I would like to add something which Tariq Amin mentioned the other day. He said, the fact that you guys don't belong to any camp, for that matter, or any city specifically, is why the book is possible in the first place. Had we taken sides, from the first day, I don't know if we, would be here with the book in the first place.
I mean, Fifi, referring to your first question as well, that how did you had no interest in fashion, you're not a fashion journalist. Again, we did not come in with the intention of commenting on the designs. We came in with the intention of doing an investigative look and documenting the history of it.
Okay. Well, again, it's a very good thing that we have what I believe is the first book really on Pakistani fashion that has been published, the first coffee table book, for the first any book for that matter. I could be wrong, so if somebody else knows more than me, please do correct me, but I believe it is the first, is it not? Yes, I'm getting nods from Saad, so I'm going to take that as a yes.
Tapuk has his books.
Well, I mean, the first history. Actually, all the photographers, a lot of the photographers have been published in books, but this is the first sort of history of Pakistani fashion that, let's say, which is not a single.
It's also, Fifi, I'd like to digress from that by saying that it's not just a fashion book, it's also a look into Pakistan's social history. I've long argued that a lot of Pakistani history is documented through a political or strategic or through a Western lens. And this is the first time where we're actually looking at it through a cultural lens. It's an important part of our social history. I have always felt that if the country is to make progress, then it has to own its history in its entirety. You cannot cherry pick that this suits us, therefore we're going to write about this, or this suits this agenda, we're going to talk about that, and ignore the rest. It doesn't work that way. It should not work that way.
So what criteria did you use to pick the designers? And obviously everything is not in the book, but some are there in bolder mention, some are there, more as a footnote. And what criteria did you use to pick the designers and personalities that you feature? That's the opening question. But I noticed a few omissions that for, at least for me or for perhaps a few other people, should have been in the book. And for example, I didn't see Nabila, a chapter on Nabila, for example. Arif Mahmood, I didn't see Deepak Parwani. And all of these were, these are just a few names that sort of I noticed.
Sure.
Rather prominent figures on the fashion scene in Pakistan. So when you're writing a fashion history,
absolutely,
time, these few people that I've named, and possibly there are more that I have, that I may not have thought of.
No, absolutely.
May be seen as glaring omissions by some. How do you feel about that?
Absolutely. When we started this project, the idea was to get to the root cause, to get to the bottom of it. Who started the industry? So we started off with Suhra Kazmi. We started off with Mr. Shroff. These are people who are identified as the first couturiers. It is not a comment on the fashion industry as a whole. It is not an advertising piece or a PR piece for the designers or for the non-designers. It is looking at those people who formed the industry, who created it, right from the grassroots level up to creating a platform that gave way to the younger lot of designers 1994 onwards. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people who say things like, I'm not in this, I'm not in that, it's all about whether you were born around that time or not. So you got to hold your parents responsible for the era you were born in. The people that we have looked at are the people who created the industry. They're identified as the first couturiers of Pakistan, the first print designers of Pakistan, the first makeup artists of Pakistan, the first photographers, and so on. With regard to the names you've taken, I'm really glad that you have. Nabila was approached. I conducted an interview with her, and at the end of it, she asked me who else was going to be in the book. After I told her that Tariq Amin was going to be in the book, she said, I don't want him to be in the book. I said, well, I can't
she didn't want
understand why she said that. She wanted to be the only stylist in the book. She said that, no, if I'm going to be part of this project, that I will decide who goes into the book or not. To which I respectfully said, ma'am, this is a history, it's documentation. It cannot just represent what you want. So that was the end of that. Arif Mahmood was certainly approached. Saad went, had a wonderful meeting with him. I'm sure Saad will share his story as well. Arif categorically said, I'm doing my own fashion book. And that was the end of the conversation. Deepak Parwani, I don't understand why somebody would say Deepak Parwani is not in the book, because the history he's the one who's narrating the history. He's the one who gave us the entire framework. Deepak Parwani is an integral part of the book. With regards to why there is no separate chapter on him, Fifi, I'd like to say that there is no separate chapter on any of the designers. They've all been given equal coverage in the book via their images. No designer has been interviewed specifically on the basis of being just a designer at all. So for Deepak to, or for people to assume that Deepak isn't in the book, that's not true. Deepak is in the book. He's in the opening page,
in the book.
The first
he
page.
Is in the, yeah, but not in a separate kind of chapter or whatever you may want to call it, separate section. But I was a bit, this brings up the aspect of the book, and that is, your sort of research methodology and your primary and secondary sources that you used in the book. Now, for example, I noticed that in the historical section, you used a lot from Deepak Parwani and a lot from Zurain Imam as well. But primarily, there was a lot of Deepak, I think. And yet Deepak was not born at that time. So Deepak, as an authority on being tagged as an authority on a historical era that he was not a part of or witness to me was unconventional in that sense. What primary sources would you go to perhaps authenticate? Because what Deepak might say, because that was not his first-hand experience. So what sort of primary and sources did you go to authenticate or to verify or to discover more about that era?
Absolutely. Deepak has not commented on the industry. Deepak has given us a social history of the country. So he's talking about the arts. He's talking about the history of the designers, how and when they came. The book itself is divided into two sections. You see that the designers are able to communicate their stories through their visuals, through their designs. And they prefer to do that. They were all offered the chance to share their stories. They preferred to share their archives instead. The non-designers, on the other hand, we came about when we were doing our research, and we realized that the industry did not just come about because of the designers, because they were just making clothes, so to speak. It is actually the non-designers, the photographers, the models, the makeup artists, the stylists, the fashion journalists, the publishers, who took these designers' clothes and created an industry around it. And therefore, because they didn't have visuals that could narrate their stories, therefore the text, the interviews, the profiles are of those people. And that's all primary research. Our secondary research comes from the print ads and the Newsline archives, through which we also gathered a lot of research surrounding the industry, who did what when. So while I understand your concern about Deepak being the primary source of the history, that's more social. And he was interviewed at a time when he was the chairman of the Karachi Fashion Council, chairman or the president. I forget what his official title was. This is before Maheen Khan took over. The head of the Karachi Fashion Council. Yeah. And otherwise, other than that, I'd like to say, Fifi,
Fashion Pakistan, as it's called. Yeah.
Yes, but when it came to the history of Pakistan, I do have 2 degrees that I did study Pakistan and South Asia, culturally, politically. So I knew that what was the right thing and what wasn't the right thing to put in.
Fair enough. I just think it's important to be transparent about these things, and this is an opportunity to discuss exactly what your sources were. So your book is focused primarily around personalities. We're talking about these larger than life personalities. So your book is focused around personalities. Your headings are personality focused. Why did you choose this particular format?
The book is chronological. If you look at their names, you'll see their professions, and you'll also see the dates of their entry into their roles. So it is a chronological thing, and the book is broken up into varying chapters. So chapter 1 is all about their revivalists, who were a group of ladies who went out and discovered this country, which up until the 60s and 70s had remained undiscovered, because Pakistan was a brand new country. People were still either, suffering from the repercussions of the partition, or looking forward to what regional countries such as Afghanistan, Iran, the US, India as well had to bring forth and offer. And it was pretty much a bohemian nation, I would say. It's until the 1980s that the group of revivalists actually go out. Sorry, I beg your pardon, till the 70s onwards, that the revivalists decide to go out and see. Those are the revivalist designers who set the tone for what fashion would be in Pakistan with regards to craft. Then comes the 80s, and that's when you have the non-designers come in and they say, right, you've got these lovely clothes, what are you doing with them? And why aren't you doing fashion shoots and whatnot? So that's the second section. And then there's a third section, which is, of course, in the 90s, when you have an established industry, which is why you'll notice that people like Deepak Parwani, Hassan Shahriyar, Kamila Rokni, Maheen Kardar, Nikki Nina, they fall in the conclusion side of it. Deepak's clothes have been featured in the book, whereas with the Lahore designers, they've just had their portraits put in. They've not even had a single page, or they've not even had a single quote to them, because they came about when the industry had been established. They capitalized on the foundation created by the first lot of designers and non-designers.
Do you think that, and this is a question arising from that, I think a lot of very pioneering work pioneering work is always done at the early stages, but Pakistani fashion was a lot about discovery in a certain era. Let's say the 80s and 90s were all about rediscovering Pakistani fashion, maybe rediscovering dakka, different types of embroideries, argozi, etc., which were now then being used again by people like Rizwan Beg, Faiza Sami, etc., who had sort of started at home and then, eventually opened shops, etc. That whole era. Maheen discovered the Dhaka pajama and sort of made it, and then the Kaul Shalwar was something that she really sort of experimented with. But you find that as time has progressed, I mean, those, in many ways, those were the rebels of the time, though they were traditionalists and yet they were rebels, because they were rediscovering and reinterpreting Pakistani fashion. Subsequently, what I would say has happened in the modern era is that because of retail, and because a lot of designers are dependent on retail, that kind of sort of rebellious spirit or pioneering spirit or sort of creative spirit has sort of dwindled slightly, in my opinion, and that people are not perhaps doing work that is as groundbreaking or path-breaking, because fashion has become so much more defined now. The industry has become so much more defined now. Do you think that is the case?
I think what has happened is that the original lot of designers, like you said, they were rebels. They decided to experiment. They were innovating with various cuts. They were not afraid of individuality. What happened is post-2000 onwards, there's been this uniformity in terms of dressing, which I suppose has come about because of the insecurity and the instability within the country. Your environment will inevitably reflect on how you're dressing. And I feel that as the country went through upheaval after upheaval, the more and more people felt the need to sort of identify with something, and conservative dressing was what they went to. They felt safe. This is an interesting insight into a nation's psyche.
Yeah.
And what has happened is that, yes, there have been designers. You have design schools churning them out. You have people at home sitting, कारीगर बुलवा लिया है, दबके का काम हो रहा है, ब्लॉक प्रिंटिंग का ठप्पा लगा लेना घर पे करके, लेकिन उससे क्या हुआ है कि आपकी इंडस्ट्री बढ़ी नहीं है. There's been no evolution. It has expanded in terms of the number of designers, but it has not grown in terms of creativity. And as a result, couture designers stick to bridals because that's where the money is. They can make a jora for 5-10 lakhs starting, and that's easily 3-4 months, 3-4 महीनों का खर्चा निकल गया. With regards to retail, I think Pakistan's greatest strength has always been retail. The only brand who has capitalized on the foundation that was created by the likes of TJs and Generation is perhaps Khadi. Khadi took lawn, which had been, Barize had basically taken launch from the Kapda Bazaars and made it into a lovely shopping experience where you could go into a nice store, bricks and cement, AC, and at leisure browse through it. Khadi sort of merged Pret with the Thans wala culture. Mm-hmm. Therefore, you have Darzi culture and you have Pret under the same roof. And that's why it still retains its hold. I don't see much streetwear coming out of the young designers. I have not seen much streetwear innovation taking place. There's always some identity crisis surrounding it. If you wear something that looks Western, you're accused of being unpatriotic, a traitor, or being too Western. If you wear something that's Eastern, it's just on the other extreme of conservative dressing. So I think the new lot of designers have a lot to answer for in terms of lack of individuality and lack of innovation.
I would also suggest that I think it has a lot to do with what circles one moves in. And there are also class divisions. It's different, I think.
Absolutely.
And I think what is an interesting development is the rise of the multi-brand store. So
Yes.
not just stores, but also online stores.
But Fifi,
which
that had been happening beforehand as well. Zahir Rahimtullah was one of the first to create the multi-brand store with labels.
But before what? Yes, I mean,
this is again before 9/11.
But I'm saying
of course.
online, for example, is a more recent development and has flourished in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And multi-brand stores, what I'm talking about is online as well, because that takes it to a different audience as well. So, for example, not everybody may have a store in Sialkot or Faisalabad, but online stores allow young women in those those cities and those smaller second-level cities in Pakistan, cities, to have access to fashion, which can be delivered to their doorstep. So I think that's how. To what extent do you think? And awareness has grown through social media as well. So, for example, designers on social media,
I don't know,
magazines on social media, celebrities on social media. What extent do you think this kind of the online industry and the sort of social media has affected the sort of trickling down, I would say, in some ways, of Pakistani fashion?
It has certainly added to the economy. Pakistani fashion, more sales can be generated, but in terms of creativity, it's the same things that are being available. Unstitched lawn suits or kurtis or three-piece lawn suits, that's it. There's nothing new that's being offered online. Those same things that you see in stores are being sold online as well. The only difference is that the reach is increased more. So it's gone beyond the urban centers of Lahore, Karachi, Islamabad, Faisalabad, like you said, now it's gone to Gujranwala, Sialkot, Gujarat, and so on, but at all.
Okay, so I was reading an article by Tom Ford recently, and he said that we need clothes to make us smile. And his new collection is looking forward to a happier time. He's just been interviewed during the whole Corona thing, which he's lamenting quite a bit. And he says that our clothes should now look forward to a happier time. You know, as you were saying, that our times do affect how we dress or how we look or whatever. So one of the things that he's saying is that we need to be happier in the way we dress, to be happier with our bodies, to be happier with, however we're presenting ourselves. So how do you think that COVID-19 has impacted the fashion industry? And what do you think is the future of Pakistani fashion post-Corona or in the times of Corona?
I think Tom Ford just legitimized my entire book, given how it started off with a woman being unhappy in her clothes. But we can pass that on to him. Please let him know that you've just legitimized it completely. Yeah. Validated, rather, that would be the right word to use. Validated. Yeah. But yes, I agree with him wholeheartedly. I think if anything, Corona has shown that we need every single person. Look, we all have one life to live, right? This lockdown showed that it can affect everyone. It broke down class barriers, it broke down social barriers, it broke down race, everything. That's an ideal view. On the other hand, it's made one realize that this year, a lot of people have said, is the lost year, the lost summer, the last 6-7 months were just a lost period. If anything, I feel personally that this is an indication that we should be individuals. We should own ourselves in our entirety. We should certainly celebrate ourselves, our personalities, individuals as we are, and dress accordingly as well. I don't want to look like a clone after this. I don't want to look like everyone else out there. I want to be who I am, and I want to be accepted for what I am. And I feel that a lot of people, by and large, are feeling the same. Nisa?
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask you the last. Saad, did you want to say something before I ask?
No, you talked about how Corona has changed things. So the other day I saw a photographer, an Indian photographer friend of mine, he did a shoot via FaceTime where the model was, in the comfort of her bedroom, and he was just instructing different poses to her. And that shoot was actually published. So imagine they're geographically distant from each other. It may not allow the same chemistry that exists on a shoot, for example. But you see, they did the entire shoot via FaceTime. So that's interesting how, Corona would have never taught us something like that, had we not had Corona, for example.
Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. Now I'm going to ask you guys one more question, and I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. So Meher, can you not Meher, sorry, but Iman, can you tell us if there are any potential questions from the audience? Otherwise, I'll just proceed with my questions. Well, while Iman gets back to us, no questions. My God, I've asked all the questions and you've given all the answers. But so
you have indeed.
One of the things I wanted to talk about is it tacky or trendy to brandish designer insignia? How do you feel about logo lust? You know, how everybody likes to wear, the Louis Vuitton bags and the big brands and the sort of, the insignias, and whether local or foreign, right on their chest, the Dolce & Gabbana t-shirts and all of that. What do you feel? Is it tacky or trendy?
It's not my cup of tea, but if it makes someone happy, then so be it.
I want to know what Saad has to say on this.
I think, I am not someone, I probably can't afford designer wear in the first place, but I think it's trendy, yes. And as Meher said, I think someone who has the kind of money, I think you've seen people who make it big. What is the first thing they do? They splurge on these brands, like branded everything, each and everything from their bedroom to what they wear is branded. And for those who can't, I think, which is why I think this whole thing about replicas, we were talking about how, like Meher mentioned lawn and all. So you see how replicas are so popular nowadays, is because people who cannot afford.
Yeah, and insignia is also a replica. So I mean, it's another way of standardizing or kind of.
It's also an insight. It's also an insight into people's thought process. It's seen as a stamp of acceptability that if you're walking around with a designer handbag, then you're immediately indicating that you've made it and that you are now allowed to sit at the table. I think it's a degradation of society when your values are about holding a branded handbag or wearing a branded t-shirt. But I still stand by what I said, that if that's what makes you happy, then so be it. However, in the long run, it's quite, it's a worrying sign.
I think it is, yes. I'm not wearing any designer anything right now. So, normal.
Neither am I.
H&M t-shirt. So there is a question from the audience, and I think what people want to know is, because you went through your own process, and we covered this a little bit, you went through your process of how your book was published and you decided to self-publish. What they're asking is that, is there sort of any, let me just read it again. It says, any advice for new writers looking at writing a book on fashion in the near future? So you've written the history of Pakistani fashion. If you were doing another book, or you think there's something that might work as the next book on Pakistani fashion, what should be the next book on Pakistani fashion? What should people focus on, or perhaps write a book upon?
Well, I'm really happy to hear this question, because I always wanted this book to be a starting point and not the ultimate definitive book. So I'm really happy that there are people who are asking that if there was to be a second book, how to go about it. My advice to them would be, go in with an open mind. Listen, hear to everything and anything. Do not leave any stone unturned. I mean, Saad and I, we were really put through the mill when it came to this book. I remember conducting interviews at 3 a.m, holding 2 sick babies in my arm.
That was probably mine, I think.
No, that wasn't yours, actually. That wasn't yours. This was another, it was someone else who decided that she was only going to be available at that particular time and no other time. So, okay. Saad had to go through all these trolling through Urdu bazaars, checking out Urdu old bookshops. I mean, you have to get your hands dirty. None of it was easy. A lot of people have looked at the book and said, "Oh, this is so effortless. Aap logon ne tasveerein le li, interview kar liya, aur bas aapne ikakthi kar di." Not at all. Not at all. It's incredibly difficult. Explore as much as you can. Maybe somebody wants to do a book on the second lot of designers. Maybe they want to see the impact fashion has had on Pakistan. Be open your mind. Do not limit yourself, and don't take no for an answer, ever.
So would you like to say something, Saad?
Yeah, our book very intelligently wraps up, around the late 90s and early 2000s. So it's 2020. You can still do a book on the last 20 years. And, there's a lot that can be done. A lot of new designers have come in, new photographers and whatnot. And there's something I'd like to add because, you see, we mentioned the production process of the book, and how, and obviously, like everything, it has costed us money. But there's this concept abroad, which is not very common here in Pakistan, which is the Kickstarter thing, the crowdfunded money thing. So if you have an amazing idea and if you don't have, the funds to, because we had someone do the layouts, we had to pay him, obviously. And, we had someone print it and, obviously it's an entire process which costs money. So if you think you have a great idea, you can always put up a Kickstarter fund, for example. You can mention the idea. You can give incentives to the first 10, 20 people who, are pulling in money into that they'll get the first 20 copies. And if it's a good idea, you can have money from all over the world pouring in,
And if
you
it's a
can
good
actually go
idea,
ahead
Saad
with,
will contribute. Saad will contribute money to it as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because you see, when I was traveling around for the book, I was mostly touring with my band. So I would stay back a few days in Karachi, and, try to meet people, try to meet, photographers, or for whatever reason, I would stay back and, just try to get hold of some sort of content. I spent 7 hours, in Newsline's office in their basement, just trying to, take photographs of their old magazines because they're the only publication that allowed us, access to their archives. So
Well, that's very sad that they were the only publication.
Yeah, that is very sad. So, but my point is
It is sad, but that's what we faced.
Yeah, but my point is that had I had to travel on my own to Karachi, you see, that's where it would become very costly. So I was lucky in that sense that I was already traveling to Karachi on someone else's money. And, I would stay back additionally on my money, at one of those Clifton guest houses and, just then travel on a cab to store. It was worth effort because I see the archives are there. So, and what I think, and Fifi, this would interest you as well. And it's not just because I'm a musician. I also, for example, when I went through Newsline's archives, I discovered like there's this little snippet about Junoon's first concert in Karachi, for example. So there's this line, from the early 90s. I think you know them very well. You could probably correct me on the date as well. But my point is that I knew this kind of access I would not get this chance again. So I remember taking photos of even, like Parsi archives, like there used to be a Zoroastrian calendar printed back in the days. You would probably have copies of those as well. But for me, it was so fascinating. There was an ad, that if you want this calendar or something. So I took a photograph of that as well. And then a lot of stuff that had been written on musicians, some of these people are not even around anymore because this was the 80s and the 90s.
So this sort of brings me to a related question, Saad, if I may ask you, since you are a musician, is that the connection between celebrity and fashion. And what has been happening is it's always existed, but what has been happening in the last 10 years, especially in Pakistan, in the last decade, is that celebrities have more and more become, they sort of end fashion shows in Pakistan. They do the walk, the last walk, and so on. And celebrities endorse certain designers, and certain designers have become involved in dressing celebrities, and and their bonds have become very famous. That so and so will only wear so and so's clothes, or there is the whole sort of film fashion thing where films are also. You had designers who design for films and do clothes for films, and which are very different from, let's say, doing clothes for everyday wear, or doing clothes even for sort of occasion wear. What do you think in Pakistan there has been this connection, and it's become greater and greater to the extent that if there's a designer who doesn't have a celebrity to wear their product, they're almost doomed, I think, in Pakistan, because the whole culture of social media and showing yourself constantly and being retweeted and being liked and so on has become such a big thing. Do you think that is this doing something for Pakistani fashion, or is it dooming Pakistani fashion?
I think it works for the designers, but we were having this discussion the other day with someone, and they mentioned that the quality of models, for example, has gone down, in terms of, what the kind of models we had back in the days. And the discussion revolved around this idea that for designers, it's very convenient, get a familiar face. You have Shahid Afridi, in your clothes. You can have Shan.
I wasn't quite thinking of Shahid Afridi when I asked this
I know.
question. But
I think
okay,
you're talking about maybe more like the drama stars, maybe the film stars, maybe
I
those.
suppose I mean, Mehwish Hayat, Myra Khan, that kind of thing, or even the, we haven't really discussed menswear as such, but male celebrities have also been very, very much part of, if Fawad Khan is going to wear something, and then everybody wants to wear it.
But it's very short-term value. There's very short-term value. Sure, you get a feature in a magazine. Sure, you get some orders from maybe the same set of people who can afford those clothes, but it doesn't do very much for the industry as a whole. It doesn't exactly push creativity forward. And in this day and age with social media, and especially the younger lot who are really innovating in their own ways, I mean, they're coming up with these trendy brands and they're really being very creative. I think that this celebrity culture of Pakistan, it has not changed, Fifi. What is different? What is different from Maida Khan wearing a particular designer's clothes in a film compared to, let's say, Tanveer Jamshed designing clothes for PTV dramas? The concept is the same. It has not changed.
Well, social media didn't exist at that time, for instance. So Myra Khan at
Social
Cannes
media
wearing a Pakistani designer has certainly gets mentioned, or
but does that push creativity forward? Does that create something new for the market? No, it does not.
But
So
is creativity the only criteria or the only thing that's happening in fashion? I think there's all kinds of other aspects of it as well, in terms of there is the inspirational, aspirational side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's a very interesting interplay. I'm just going to quickly move on. There are one or two questions from the audience, and then we can sort of end this. It's difficult to end because it's such an exciting discussion, but this question is quite interesting. There are two questions, and I'll throw them both out, and either one of you can answer. It says, one question is, sometimes the replica cloth is more durable than the originals and with non-fading colors. What do you say? I don't know, really. I mean, is that something that is the case?
No, that's the first
I haven't really bought replica stuff, so I don't know. I mean, I don't buy designer fashion either, as such.
I don't know. Usually it's the opposite. But
I don't really know the answer to that. But if it is more durable, buy it. Buy whatever is more durable and it works for you longer. Don't buy something, in fact, go back to the designer and say, I bought this from you and I washed it twice and it's faded. You're the customer, so, don't take that sitting down. But this is a good question to end with is, how much demand for national identity, how has a nationalist identity played a role in fashion? And to what extent is fashion about a national identity, whether it's the shalwar kameez, whether it's dressing a particular way? And yes, I know your book has talked a little bit about, ZAB and how the Awami suit was brought about. And, so there's a quest for a national identity has always, to a certain extent, been linked with fashion, in the sense that there was a time when PTV started banning saris, saying that that's not Pakistani, that's Indian, or musicians, and Saad, you would know that Junoon and Vital Signs upset a lot of people by wearing jeans while singing Dil Dil Pakistan. So this whole thing about, be Pakistani, buy Pakistani, look Pakistani, how is that all connected to fashion?
Saad, do you want to go first?
Oh no, I think the part about musicians, yes, I remember Ali Azmat was banned, back in the days because probably he had long hair. So yeah.
Yes, he was, and Vital Signs originally they objected to them wearing jeans as well. So jeans, you could wear black jeans, but you could not wear blue jeans on PTV at a certain
That's
point.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Color ban.
Yeah, because black didn't look like jeans, but blue looked like jeans, and jeans was not considered very Pakistani. So, just like saris were not supposed to be worn. And,
but weren't they wearing blue jeans in Dil Dil Pakistan?
They
Weren't
were.
they
That's why. There were some. Some people objected to that. So yeah.
Yeah. With regards to the national identity, look, Fifi, the shalwar kameez has always remained the basic silhouette from which every single designer has worked with, right? Not from the original lot, nobody really came out and said that, right, our silhouette is going to be something else. So the shalwar kameez has always retained its hold as the very basic starting point. That's the clean white sheet from which all designers start out with. With national identity, I feel has lost its creativity, it lost its impact in terms of the creative element, where at one point, couture took a lot of pride in mixing various craft from different regions across Pakistan and coming up with something completely different. Nowadays, you don't really see that. There's a lot of non-Pakistani design aesthetic with crystals and Swarovskis, and that's taking precedent over local craft. So yes, the national identity is certainly preserved in Pret. In couture, not so much. Look, that is more catering towards the West and towards India in terms of silhouette. So I think when it comes to clothing, it's the Pret that has retained its national identity. As in a Pakistani look is still very much more prevalent there than it will be in couture, for sure.
Whatever that Pakistani look may be. Thank you both so much for coming and talking about your book and talking about Pakistani fashion and talking about an investigation into Pakistani fashion. As we're signing off, and I want just a quick answer from both of you, one line for each, right? I want to know who your favorite Pakistani designer is, and I want to know which Pakistani designer you wear. They may be the same and they may not be the same, but just no explanations, just quickly, your favorite Pakistani designer. And I hate these questions, which is why I'm asking them, so that I can put you in a difficult moment. Favorite Pakistani designer, and which Pakistani designer do you wear or you would love to wear?
I'll go for it.
Meher says that every time she wants to get out of a difficult one. So Saad, go for it.
Think about it. I think about my answers.
I know.
I think Amir Adnan maybe, yeah.
So Amir Adnan is your favorite designer or the designer you wear?
He is my favorite designer, yes. And
Your favorite designer. And is he the designer that you wear?
Yes, not that quite often, but yes. Otherwise, it's mostly Khadi or whatever I can get off.
Okay, there we go. We have an answer. Over to you, Meher.
I really like Kamila Rokni's clothes, and I don't really wear designer clothes. I'm more of a open than kapra bazaar type person.
There we go. That's the final word, and that's where we will leave it. Thank you for anybody who is watching and listening, and we hope this will be watched and listened to further. And if you people want to get back to any of us to continue the conversation on Twitter, on Instagram, please do so. And thank you both for being here, and thank you to LLF for giving us this platform and this opportunity for a very vibrant discussion.
Thank you,
evening,
Fifi, for letting us
Thank you,
share our
Fifi.
story and demystifying us
Thank you so much.
and clearing up everything. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
LLF.